Hi, welcome to Possibility Space. This is Ollie. Today I'm going to read you have no right to know the extent of Westminster's lobbying problem. Britain's corporate lobbying industry is a powerful and pernicious tool. It enables the wealthy to bend policy to their will. In my last piece, I outlined how lobbyists shape and constitute our government. In this follow-up, we're going to explore the rules and systems that shield the shady world of lobbying from your prying eyes. Lenient lobbying rules and draconian defamation laws. If a system's purpose is what it does, then Britain's lobbying laws have a purpose. They enable lobbyists to operate pretty much without limits. Scandals have recently engulfed David Cameron, Bill Crothers, Boris Johnson, and Robert Jenrick. Every article on these scandals will say, there is no suggestion of wrongdoing. The general tone of the reporting suggests otherwise. There are two reasons for this disparity. 1. Attesting to the weakness of Britain's lobbying rules, no one in these scandals actually broke the law. 2. England has strict defamation laws. The publisher of any potentially libelous statement carries the burden of proof. This makes it easy for those accused of wrongdoing to threaten and silence their critics. It has contributed to the prevalence of open secrets in British public life. The government already knows the solutions to these problems. It commissioned 2 reports on lobbying. They recommend extend the 2-year lobbying ban for former government ministers, reform the rules to better capture informal forms of lobbying and the use of alternative forms of communication, improve departmental reporting to increase the regularity and quality of transparency data, and make all of this legally binding. After 18 months, only 7% of their recommendations have been implemented. That is 4 out of 57 recommendations. None of the implemented recommendations are legally binding. The government also knows how to stop lawsuits that threaten and exhaust journalists and watchdogs. It packaged these up in a bill that was subsequently abandoned. You might hope the new Labour government would care more about implementation. You'd be mistaken to think so. Labour has shown no interest in reviving libel reform. It's also telling journalists that the current lobbying rules are fine. It pleads technical compliance, saying, no rules were broken, and that's just the system that we have, forgetting that it now makes the rules itself. Narrowly defined rules. The Transparency of Lobbying Act requires consultants who lobby ministers to name their clients. It does not apply to non-ministers or to opposition parties. In this year's general election, the incumbent government had effectively collapsed. A Labour win was a foregone conclusion. This meant that you could lobby, in near total secrecy, what you knew to be the incoming government. Attentive Possibility Space listeners will have noticed that this law only applies to consultant lobbyists. Consultants constitute only around 1% of all lobbyists. Those working in-house for large corporations, the vast majority, are totally exempt from this law. This is why David Cameron didn't break any laws. He was an employee of the firm he lobbied for, not a consultant. It's hardly rocket science. It's almost like successive governments haven't really wanted to solve this problem. But for completeness, I propose that these rules should apply to all lobbyists, not just consultant lobbyists. All lobbying and transparency rules should apply to all parties, not just to the government. And we should not only rely on lobbyists to self-report. Lobbied parties should provide the same level of transparency. Under Ed Miliband, Labour actually did this, but under Starmer, they refused to. Thresholds and loopholes. Britain's transparency rules say that a donation is only of public interest if it's worth more than a certain amount. A lobbyist can give an MP £1,499 and their local association £2,229 without declaring it. That is still true if they give to dozens of MPs and associations. It's a neat way to donate hundreds of thousands to political parties without declaring a penny. You have no right to know this, but thanks to Ethan Schon, we do know that lobbyists are already taking advantage of this loophole. Schon bases much of his reporting on LinkedIn, the social media site where lobbyists self-promote in gaps between their client pitches. In doing so, they tell on themselves, they reveal too much. Schon pokes fun at the toothless anti-lobbying rules of this country. On a recent podcast, he called LinkedIn the unofficial third arm of the lobbying and transparency regime. Someone else on the podcast joked, "Why is this lobbyist endorsing Wes Streeting for secret meeting and definitely not secret meeting?" Given public trust in politicians is at a 40-year low, I would recommend significantly lowering or even abolishing this threshold. We should also explore public funding of political campaigns in order to shield our politics from the hidden exercise of power and influence. It's a big cricket club and you ain't in it. In a healthy democracy, the press hold the government to account when it fails to behave. They expose malign influence and weak character. The British press is committed to defeating lobbyists in a manner of speaking. They fielded a full team at this year's Hacks versus Flacks cricket match. For our American listeners, Hacks are journalists and Flacks are lobbyists. This match was organised by lobbyist Charles Lewington, who provided free taxis, free food, and an open bar for attendees and their families. Very generous. The press maintains a similarly friendly relationship with our politicians. This is arguably more defensible than coziness with lobbyists. Journalists do need to cultivate sources after all, but it's clear that they do often give politicians an easy ride as a result of all of this coziness. Keir Starmer recently showed how this chumminess harms our democracy. Pressed by Sky News' Beth Rigby on his conduct in the Freebiegate scandal, Starmer shot back. And Beth, I might just say, gently, Sky News invite us to quite a lot of hospitality events. Your summer party is a great party costing thousands of pounds and you invite me every year. Presumably you don't want politicians to stop coming to this. That's just how politics works. This threat from Starmer to limit press access to him if they ask tough questions about lobbying can be roughly translated to, Beth, do you want to bust this whole thing wide open because we're all up to our necks in it? Overworked and underfunded journalists. In defence of Britain's journalists, it's not like they've been set up for success. Their budgets have been cut, and studies suggest that their employers focus too much on breaking news and journalism at the expense of investigations. To solve systemic problems, we've got to be tough on systems while being gentle with one another. Under severe financial and time pressures, the British press do the exact opposite. They focus on dodgy individuals, ignoring the systems that drive their behaviour. As a result, they often miss the bigger picture, which, to be fair to them, is far costlier to investigate. This year's biggest British lobbying scandal was Freebiegate. Lord Ollie was its icon. He gave tens of thousands in gifts to top Labour politicians. This made headlines for months. Meanwhile, Labour received $14.5 million from companies and individuals, and that went largely unnoticed. Editors find photos of fancy clothes and Taylor Swift concerts more captivating, I guess. Plus, they're easier to report on than the minutes of secret meetings. The story of Kevin Craig is another example of British press completely missing the forest for the trees. Craig's 15 minutes of infamy came when he bet against himself in this year's general election. The story was splashed all over the place, but almost nobody picked up on the real scandal. Craig is the founder of the lobbying firm PLMR. Their clients include private schools, private healthcare firms, and a particularly scandal-plagued care home provider. Craig gave £100,000 to Labour and pledged a further £39,000 to Labour Health Secretary Wes Streeting specifically. Labour then chose Craig as a candidate from a shortlist of 1. The good people of Central Suffolk and North Ipswich had a choice: Labour's Kevin Craig or the Conservative Patrick Spencer. Patrick's dad donated £250,000 to the Conservative Party. Spencer, the son of Daddy Big Bucks, won out. 2 candidates, a Labour lobbyist and a Tory Nepo baby, appeared to buy their way onto the ballot. This is a total indictment of how this country operates, and it flew under the radar of the press that wrote instead about a relatively small change betting scandal. Conclusion. Political lobbying is rampant in the UK, but due to poor regulation, you have no right to know about it. Compounding that issue, most of the British press won't investigate lobbying. They lack the tools, the time, and the interest. The recommendations in this article, most of which I've pilfered from think tanks and even government studies, could help. But despite their pledges, I doubt this self-described private sector Labour government will implement them. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Possibility Space is a reader-supported podcast. You can subscribe for free, or you can even become a paid member on Substack. Some acknowledgements. This article would not be possible without the great work of Ethan Shon. He is the best Kremlinologist currently working in Westminster. Shon's Substack, The Dark Arts, is a must-read. Also, vital and dangerously under-resourced, Open Democracy is more effective than Parliament's actual transparency regime. You can find links to all of these articles from my Substack. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that and found it interesting. See you next time. Bye-bye.